Okay, thank you very much everybody for joining us today for our BPA Care Seminar. I'm really delighted to welcome Richard Hickman back to Singapore. So Richard is an Emeritus Professor of Aesthetic Development from Cambridge University. He has previously worked at NIE, so it's really nice for him to come back and sort of, I guess, meet some familiar faces as well. Richard's a real professional in art education. He's published widely. He has a really extensive book journal collection. He also won the Herb Reed Award for the Lifetime Achievement given to art education in 2014. And he's also a practicing artist and has had many solo exhibitions in Asia, Australia, and in Europe as well. And so I'm really delighted to have him back with us today. He's going to be talking about future pedagogies for art education with a particular focus on learning and artistic development. So I will hand over to Richard, and then if you have any questions that you'd like to ask towards the end, you can have a bit of a dialogue as well. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's good to be back and nice to see a few familiar faces. I was working in that studio for quite a while doing, I say work, it was just painting, you know, it's not really work, is it? This is the title, Problematising Future Pedagogies in Art Education. But I left it like that because really the focus is going to be on learning and artistic development. But I want to go over some of the aspects of that particular title. And in a time-honoured fashion, I will deconstruct, if you like, some of the basic concepts in the title that we have here. I've put that problematising future in a square brackets because I'm not particularly keen on that specific title. Problematizing, it's a sort of a 21st century word that academics use quite a lot, you know. It doesn't really mean making a problem out of. It means critically examining, I think, yeah. So we're critically examining, well, future, even future is a bit problematic for me. But I'll just go through these. When we're talking about, can everyone see this, by the way? Because we've got the light on it. Problematizing. I've talked about it being a critical analysis of a particular concept or series of concepts. Pedagogy, teaching and learning. It comes from a Greek root, pedhi as in child, gogi as in leading forward. Not feet, by the way. Art. I always prefer this particular phrase here because this is a more universal phrase, creating aesthetic significance. Because some people say, well, that's not art. But it might be creating aesthetic significance. You know, the way we do our hairstyles or make a cake or do a garden or, I don't know, a ready-made. More of that later. Education. Now, I thought about this for a while. And I'm using this rather old-fashioned word, wisdom, because I think what education ought to be about is the acquisition of wisdom, imparting. It's not really to do with, I don't know, training factory fodder or, you know, making people suitable citizens for work. It's to do with really making people better people, giving wisdom, drawing that out from individuals. Now, as for the future, again, I have a bit of a problem with that term because we can never know. When academics talk about, oh, in the future we'll be doing this, or this is what will happen, often we're talking about 10, 20, 50 years maybe. But I want to make a much broader vision of what we call the future. I mean, the future is now. And what I was speaking about 5 minutes ago, now is the future from then. You know, so when we say the future, what do we mean? But I want to give an overview of time. Now here's the thing. Got something in my pocket. Just pass this around if you wouldn't mind. Have a look at it. And we can have it on this side in a minute. But I'm going to ask what you think it is. Now, this is a standard pedagogical problem that teachers have. They say, I say to my trainee teachers in the past, whatever you do, don't ask a question of an audience, can anyone tell me? Because no one will. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, okay, Paul, you had a look at it. So, in other words, from a pedagogical point of view, ask a specific person a specific question. Can you give that one back to Paul for a moment? So, how old do you think it is?
I don't know, but I would say millions of years old perhaps.
Okay, that'll do for now. That'll do for now. Let's put it over. You want to pass this over? Yes, it is millions of years old. It's got some bits on it. Yeah? These are called graptolites. The taxonomist Linnaeus called it graptolites from a Greek word grapto, as in writing, and lights as in litho, as in stone. So it's writing on stone, as in lithography, if you like. So graptolites, writing on stone. So it's pre-human, obviously. It's not writing. This is what it is. They're like this. And what we're talking about here is millions of years old. 500 million years old. That's 500 million years. Okay? So I want to put human evolution into this sort of perspective, and art into that perspective as well. We're talking about a very, very small thing in terms of human. Now, what about this? That is this. I'll give this to Paul again. Okay. You want to have a look? How old do you think this one is? I can ask you.
Wait, is it really there? 2,000?
A few thousand years. Because actually, that was giving it away a little bit here. Because some people see this, oh, it's a man-made, it's like a bullet. It's actually a belemnite. I think that's from, might be Latin for javelin or something like this. But it's actually this part of a creature. Now this one is Jurassic. It's about 160 million years old, this one. Okay. So not so old. Not so old as the other one. So what I'm pointing out here is that the time between when the graptolites were alive, which is the Ordovician period, that's named after a Welsh tribe called the Ordovices. I found it in Wales, by the way. And when this was alive, 300 million years. So there's 300 million years difference between, where's the graptolites gone? Yeah. There we go. 300 million years difference between that one and this one. And between now and then is 160 million years. So we're talking about huge, huge periods of time. I'll show you on here where humans fit into this. Ordovician period from the graptolites, around about here. If this is 1 hour, okay, so Ordovician about 6 minutes past. This is from life on Earth, not from the beginning of time. That would be much, much more. Around here, first fishes. Around here, Jurassic period. So around about 22 is when the Jurassic period was. Then we have the dinosaurs' extinction is round about here. Okay, about 60 million years ago. The first modern man is a few seconds before midnight. Okay? So in terms of life on Earth, men, humans, hominids, have not taken up a great deal of time. So how old is art? Well, my contention is that art is probably as old as humans, modern humans, Homo sapiens. But there are some people that think that this is the oldest thing that's been found, that's been fashioned by a hominin. I say hominin because it might not have been by Homo sapiens. This is from a place in Israel. Older than Neanderthals. It could have been, in fact, in my research, probably carved by Homo erectus. It was found between two layers. It could be as old as 800,000 years. Unlikely, but it could be that old. So when we say Homo erectus, that's another hominin. Looks like that. Okay. So different human species. So old art existed. That old. Okay. So art was important in those times. This is some more old stuff. This is the oldest period that we can date from South Africa. This is about 70,000 years before the Common Era, BCE, before the Common Era. And it's suggesting that pre-humans were capable of abstract thought because they were making geometric shapes. And this is the Löwenmensch, the lion man, found in Germany. Again, it's one of the oldest examples of imaginative artistic representation. Now that's important, that word imaginative, because it shows that there was a particular thing that happened in human evolution, in the brains, that enabled people to think in abstract ways, to make tools and to imagine, if you did this, this will happen. You know, most animals do not have that capacity. And round about 40,000 years, maybe a bit more than that, was this explosion of understanding and an explosion of art. This was carved from mammoth ivory. It's about like that. Here's a close-up. You can see, I mean, it's only about this big actually, but you can see how detailed it is. There's a lot of skill there. And actually, it's been estimated by archaeologists that it would take about 400 hours to make this. This is 400 hours taken away from what some people might consider to be more important things, like hunting and gathering and cooking and whatever. You know, so they were making art instead. Hold that thought for a moment. Art has been central to human endeavor, to the civilization that we belong to, ever since humans were around, basically. And there's evidence of that. This one on the left is the oldest known ceramic figure. In other words, it's been clay that's been put in a kiln or in a fire. That's from the Czech Republic. It was found in the eastern part of the Czech Republic, and here I'm going to plug the INSEA conference. Next year, next August I think, is the next World Congress. They're about every 5 years I think, and it's in Moravia, which is in the eastern part of the Czech Republic. That's next year. And we've got this other one. There's a lot of these Venus figures, fertility figures. They're about this high. And they're cross-cultural, if you like. We assume they're fertility figures for one reason or another. So these are getting on for 30,000 years before the present. Then, of course, we've got Lascaux, the very famous thing, caves in France. Incidentally, these were discovered by a dog. A dog called Robot. Ran off, and when the owner went looking for him, he found him in the cave and saw all of this stuff. So that's Lascaux, and you can see there's a lot of skill there. So I'm asking, how were these art and craft skills passed on to other generations? Did they teach them? Were there art teachers 40,000 years ago? Yeah, probably, you know. There certainly weren't any IT teachers. But, so you see, I'm putting this into a very broad context here. This is some more. You can see how sophisticated these are. These are not primitive beasts grunting around, sort of, oh, I'll do a bit of chalk here, bit of charcoal there. Now, these are very sophisticated artists, you know, central to the civilization at that time. And here we're talking, over 30,000 years ago. That's before any written accounts, before any alphabet or whatever. So we're talking about these sort of timing. Lascaux is here. 63 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Homo sapiens is round about here. So that first one that I showed you, the oldest one's round about here. So this is where we've got this real outpouring in the Upper Paleolithic time. Real outpouring of creative activity. So, this isn't reflected in schools, is it? You know, this central importance of art does not show up in schools. What's the first subject that goes when they rejig the curriculum? Or when an art teacher leaves? Are they always replaced? You know, certainly if it was a maths teacher, maybe an English teacher, maybe a languages teacher, there is, I think we all know there's a bit of a hierarchy, isn't there? STEM subjects tend to be top of the hierarchy for whatever reason. So this central place of art in human culture is not reflected in our schools. I've talked about art being creating and conferring aesthetic significance. I've put these two words, creating and conferring, because when we're teaching and learning about art, it's not just making art, it's understanding art as well. More about that in a moment. So I did some research about 10 years ago, and it resulted in this book, The Art and Craft of Pedagogy. And the main premise of this book was that good art teachers, or effective or successful art teachers, made a good, effective, successful model for all teachers, for all subjects. And this was borne out by, in the UK, by the inspection reports. The last inspection report that was based on subjects said that the most effective teachers were teachers of art in secondary schools. And I wanted to investigate this further. And what I found was that the effective art teachers use this range of different approaches to their pedagogy. Demonstration, coaching, using visual material, using a range of media. And this is borne out by psychological research to do with how people learn. More of that in a moment. So, what I've found is that schools and other educational institutions do not really promote creative pedagogy. Here is a case in point. The least effective way of conveying information is probably a lecture format. You know, really I should be getting you to all do things. I'm doing a workshop later on, so we'll do something then. But not a lot of the stuff goes through, you know. This is why I showed you these things earlier, so that you can actually have something physical to look at, you know, and I could talk about these. So really, I want you to be critical consumers of my pedagogy as well. Identify the things that I'm doing right. Don't focus on what I'm doing wrong. Yeah. Identify what I'm doing right. So, you know, this will inform your own teaching, hopefully. So, what have we got here? Context of art pedagogies. So really, this is a very broad subject. We're talking about historical, social, technological, philosophical and psychological approaches. Now, I'm not going to look at all of those, but this talk today is, I suppose, basically informed by two aspects of psychology. One, evolutionary psychology, which is what I've been talking about earlier, and the other, developmental psychology, how humans learn during their time from being a toddler to adulthood. Schools and schooling is obviously something that we need to focus on, because this is where a lot of education is supposed to happen. Or does it? You know. So, what do we mean by education? Well, I said right at the beginning that, as far as I'm concerned, education is not to do with, I use the term factory fodder, you know. It's not to do with providing a workforce for the country, really. That's training. To be educated means acquiring wisdom, I've suggested. Schooling is a normative enterprise. In other words, it's trying to make everyone think in a particular way. School knowledge is not necessarily real knowledge. Training is what happens in most places. And governments like to use the word training. They say teacher training colleges, or they used to. They don't say teacher education colleges. I'm talking about different countries. Training. This is training, you know. You jump through hoops. This is not being educated. This is not making the dogs wiser dogs. It's saying, you know, this is how you do it. You do it like this, you know. No, jump higher. No. And you'll get a reward, maybe a little tidbit of bonio, okay, if you do it right, or a smack if you do it wrong. So all that analogy is, I think, reasonably fair for a lot of educational institutions. Is there an alternative? Well, not practically at the moment, although there's a lot of homeschooling going on and so forth. This is a cartoon that I used in the book that I mentioned earlier. Some of you might recognize this, the teacher, you know. Settle down, face the front. If it's so interesting, perhaps you'd like to share it with the whole class. Sit down, the belly's a signal for me, not for you. And there's the children all, oh, I never knew it could be so good as this. You know. So this is just a cartoon I thought I'd throw in for good measure. But in the research that I was doing at that time and subsequently, I came across this as a report by the Open University. Now, this is a successful report, and I thought I would flag this up because it's something worth reading. It identifies a lot of the things that I identified in my own book. Like these here, I won't go through all of them. But you can see that some of these things are very particular to the arts. Analytics of emotions, responding to the emotional states of students, and so forth. So these are a range of findings that they found that effective teachers actually did. And none of them are really typical of what happens in the average school. Talking about making use of outdoor resources, you know, visiting factories, museums, farms, and so forth. More of that later. They did come up with this quote from that pedagogy research. They said that a focus on technologies could run the risk of chasing each invention up and down the switchback of innovation, marketing hype and obsolescence. So if you focus too much on future pedagogies being determined by the nature of the technology, you know, we're in danger of not really understanding the nature of how we learn. Because we learn, from a psychological perspective, in the way that we've always learned, from Paleolithic times to now. Whether that's delivered by a drone or AI, it doesn't matter. That's neither here nor there when it comes to the actual psychological processes that happen when we're learning about things. More of that in a moment. So as far as arts education is concerned, there are a few questions. If we're using contemporary art, time-based media involves using contemporary technology, and this is evolving all of the time. We also need to think, well, who decides what sort of art we expose our students to? Contemporary art can be quite controversial. There's censorship involved and so forth. It's also quite difficult to understand for some people. But we do need to prepare students for the future. So soft skills, such as teamwork and communication and so forth, are important aspects that art teachers can really put forward in their teaching. So we need to decide. We can't be all of these at once, or can we? We probably can, actually. We can be an artist of one sort or another. We can be an educator. But being an art educator, I would suggest, is also epistemologically sound. It's a separate discipline, if you like. Art education has its own journals, has its own concepts, and so forth. So we can be artists, we can be educators, we can be art educators, all three. But how do we learn? How do we learn in art? What are we learning in art, and who decides? So we need to bear in mind that learning involves all of these things: speaking, listening, reading, writing, doing. Okay. And this is what we should be doing now, of course, not just listening to me. You should be making notes, maybe reading up things afterwards, doing something practical. So effective learning when we're actively involved in listening, doing, reading, writing. Okay. And watching. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if you're a teacher of art, you're teaching concepts. In the same way as a mathematics teacher will teach concepts. Learning in art means acquiring certain art concepts. And concepts can be very simple and concrete, as I said here. You say, yes, this is a plinth. You can touch it. It's a concrete, simple concept. But the concept of justice is a bit more abstract. Concept of Dada is difficult to understand because you can't understand anti-art unless you understand art, and understanding art is a complex concept. What's important is that concepts are required more effectively if they're used with what we might call supporting material, like images and so forth. I'll give you an example. Let's look at this concept of aerial perspective. I can talk about aerial perspective, and I can talk about the use of colour to represent depth in an image. This one is, that's right, it's called Sentinels. So I can say, oh yes, if you look at the colours, they change in the distance. We can tell that's the distance because of the linear perspective, things are getting smaller. So that's another concept that I can show here, linear perspective. So in terms of the concept of colour, we can say, yes, the hue changes, it goes towards blue. So we've got the concept of colour being made up of the concept of hue. The tone changes, it gets lighter. So the concept of tone. And the saturation changes, it gets less saturated. So here with one picture, as supporting material for learning the concept of colour, we can learn about colour, tone, which is divided into tint and shade if you're a painter, hue and saturation. So within that one picture, that's supporting our concept learning about the nature of colour. So that's a fairly easy example. So we know that we've learnt a concept when you can use that concept in a situation other than the one in which it was learnt. So now you all know about aerial perspective. So you can go into museums and say, oh, look, there's aerial perspective there in that painting. You know? But if you can't say that, you haven't learnt it properly. If you can tell me now, here, yes. But you need to be able to take that away and apply it in another situation. And this is important. You can only really teach concepts by hooking them onto a learner's existing conceptual framework. So, you know, you can't teach quantum mechanics unless you know basic physics to start with. You know? So this, in art, as in any other subject, involves progression from the simple to the complex and from the concrete to the abstract. Things getting more difficult, building upon your existing conceptual framework. Scaffolding, if you like. Now we know about scaffolding. To a Westerner coming to somewhere like Singapore or Hong Kong, it's quite amusing and interesting to see scaffolding made out of bamboo. Yeah. But it works well. Scaffolding is there to help the workers do their job. In education, scaffolding is a way of putting concepts together to assist the learner, and it's gradually taken away. In other words, the coaching or the teaching becomes gradually less as the learner learns more. And Lev Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist, came up with this concept of the zone of proximal development. And I think most of us are familiar with that, but it's such an important concept that I want to reiterate this. And this is way back in 1938. And this is still relevant now. So here in the green zone, you can accomplish a task or understand a concept without the help of a teacher. It's easy. Yeah. You know it, or you can work it out on your own. Here, you're able to understand the concept with the help of what is called a more knowledgeable other. That's usually a teacher. Could be a drone. You know. But it's that more knowledgeable other that does the coaching and the scaffolding that helps the learner to acquire the concepts. And here, you're not able to accomplish a task even with the help of a teacher because you don't have the conceptual framework to build upon. This is all fairly basic stuff, but it's important to reiterate this because what I'm suggesting in this talk is that the way we learn now is the way that we will learn in the future, and it's the way that we learned 50,000 years ago. Put your hands up if you know Latin. See, if it was in Cambridge, it'd be everybody. Not everybody, but quite a few. When I was at school, they said I couldn't apply to Cambridge, not that I would have done anyway, because I didn't have O-level Latin. They abolished that rule in 1960, so I was okay anyway. Okay, ars gratia artis. We know what that means. Ars gratia artis. All you people that don't know Latin. What do you think it might mean? What's artis sound like? Ars? Well, gratius. Yeah.
Is it art to set you free?
Yeah, more or less. Or art for art's sake is what people, yeah. Okay. See, we got the, we don't know Latin, but we know this. This is like the green zone, or maybe brown. The green zone moving towards the what was it called? What was that other zone? Yellow. Yeah, thank you. So orange. No? What's green? Oh, yellowy green. Yeah, okay. Anyway, this is the green zone. Yeah, just checking. Okay, we know that. That's the green zone. What about this one? I've used this before. Ars longa vita brevis. Ars, we've already decided we know what that means, because it sounds like art, doesn't it? Okay. What about longer? Longer sounds like, what do you think? Longer. Don't look it up. Yeah, this is your coaching tool. All right, long. Yeah, it sounds like it's long, isn't it? Yeah, it's like long. Yeah.
Vita is life, right?
Yeah, vita, life. Okay, yes, all these Latin scholars. Vita, vitality, vitamin. You know, life. Brevis, brevity. Yeah. So now we know what that means, don't we? It's a Latin phrase. Yeah. Ars longa vita brevis.
Extends or short life, I don't know.
Art is long, life is short, if you like, literally. Yeah. Okay. So we can get that with the help of a so-called more knowledgeable other, so-called. Yeah. So this is in the yellow zone. Yeah. We can build upon what you already know. Yeah. And if we accompany that with another image, you can say, ah, yes, now I understand, because this is like a Vanitas painting, 17th century Dutch, completely involved with talking about the brevity of life. You know, the skull, the hourglass, the tulip that's about to die. Okay. So here we've got an example of using an image to support the concept learning. So an example of where it gets a little bit more difficult, and I've used this one before. I know at least two people here who know what that is. Kakos gilis psopho thenechi. I mean, yeah, this is definitely in the red zone, isn't it? Yeah. But actually, if we really look and we think about it, especially if I give a bit more visual information, bad doggy, okay? Look at this word. I think, although it's difficult to know what this means if you don't know the Greek alphabet. Yeah, psopho, who knows what that means, you know. Kako, we can see it says K-A-K-O, kako. Okay, so we can read that. So we're not completely in the red zone. Okay, cacophony, kako plus phony, cacophony, bad sound. Yeah? So even here, with a little bit of help, it's not totally in the red zone. Yeah. What would be totally in the red zone would be, oh, that's what it means, by the way. A bad dog never dies. What would totally be in the red zone would be this term. Because not only is it difficult to understand because of the Greek lettering, the concept itself is a particular concept that we're not that familiar with. It's ekphrasis. Now, the last time I gave a talk here, they used this picture. And this is from an exhibition that I had in King's College, which was called the Ekphrasis Exhibition. And this picture on the left here is an example. It means art inspired by other art forms. So this one was inspired by William Blake's poem, The Echoing Green. And all of the paintings in that exhibition at King's College were all inspired by poems of one sort or another. So that term ekphrasis up here, yeah, it's not working. This term here, this is definitely in the red zone for most people, unless you're a classic scholar. Okay. So hopefully I've put over to you this concept of the zone of proximal development. Some things you can understand without the help of a more informed other. Some things you need a bit of help. Some things, even with a more informed other, even with a teacher, you can't understand it. And in that middle zone, what we need is also other visual supporting material, or other material of some sort or another, to support the language. You know, language is important, but the visual language also is going to be important. So art in education involves both of these things, being able to make art and being able to understand art. I think many of you will be familiar with DBAE, discipline-based art education. This is where the discipline, if you like, of art is divided into 4 areas of art history, art criticism, studio making, and aesthetics. And this is basically the model about knowing about art and making art. And there are different ways in different countries that this is approached in the curriculum. By the way, I once looked at a PhD thesis that was looking at discipline-based art education, and she got it completely wrong. She was thinking discipline as in discipline, you know, you need to be disciplined. And she totally misunderstood the notion of it being a subject area. Anyway, that's by the way. So, teaching and learning in art, we've got to have this balance between knowing about and understanding and making and doing. So we call that procedural knowledge. That's knowing how to do something. And I give an example here, knowing how to do a representational drawing. Procedural knowledge, the process. And that's often contrasted with declarative knowledge, knowing about something. And I give an example there. So in the art curriculum and in our teaching, we need this balance, and they inform one another. Declarative and procedural knowledge. So I've come up with this particular approach I call the 4R approach. React, research, respond, and reflect. React. This is your initial affective or emotional response to an artwork. Oh, I don't like that. Or my dog could do better than that. Or whatever. These are some questions that you might ask. How do you relate to it? Research. This involves researching within the artwork, looking at the content and the form and so forth. Systematic inquiry. It could also mean researching outside of the artwork. I mean, this could be done there and then, looking at the artwork. Research could be on your phone, it could be going back home and doing some research on the internet or going to a library, looking up in books and so forth. Having done that, then you'll be in a position to respond in a more informed way, to use your own language to talk about the artwork. A considered response as opposed to an effective emotional response. So how do you now feel about the artwork? Okay. So this is a particular strategy that I've used to reasonable effect or good effect with students. And this last one reflects, it's an opportunity to think about how this particular artwork has affected you personally or not. Looking at the nature of the artwork in the light of findings from the research process. What insights can looking at this artwork give? Because art, when it's done right, if you like, multi-layered, profound, can have some real impact on our lives. You know, it's not just to do with having a pretty picture. You know, often it's challenging assumptions about things. I often use this picture because it's one of my favourite pictures in one way. It's by an artist I admire, William Holman Hunt. So, looking at this picture, react, research, respond, reflect. What's our initial reaction to this? You know, it's a rural scene. A couple of lovers, if you like, having a nice time. You know, so we ought to think, oh yes, pleasant. You know, yeah, it's a pleasant, rural, bucolic scene. I've wanted to use that word bucolic for a long time. A bucolic scene. Okay. But is it? Okay, so we can do some research into it. We look a bit more carefully. What's going on here? Or here? Or here? Or here? Or here? Well, I can magnify those. That's a death's head hawk moth, which already you think, it's a little bit sinister. Okay? It's showing her this death's head hawk moth. Now, I looked into this. The death's head hawk moth, that's its Latin name, Acherontia atropos. It's derived from the river of pain. It takes its name from the ancient Greek fate who cuts the thread of life. So already we're starting to get something slightly sinister here. Okay. Why did the artist use that? Because he's got it sort of zoologically accurate, you know. It's not just any old moth. So we're starting to think, maybe there's more to this painting than meets the eye. What about this sheep here? Well, here's a real sheep. This one's bloated. Not surprisingly, it's a disease called sheep bloat. Okay. So he's ignoring the ill sheep. Mm-hmm. He's fooling around with his girlfriend instead of tending to the ill sheep. Here, he's supposed to be stopping the sheep from going into the corn. So there's one already there, and there's one about to go in there. Here, they're feeding the lamb these green apples, which will make it ill. Okay. And the artist himself says what the painting is about. He says it represents a shepherd who is neglecting his real duty of guarding the sheep. And that was an analogy for vicars and priests who weren't looking after their flock in the church. So what looked like an interesting, sort of fairly pleasant romantic bucolic scene is actually something else. But we only get to that by looking carefully inside the picture and also doing our background research. In this case, looking at what the artist himself said about it. So here, this is a spiral of learning, if you like. React, reflect, research, reflect, respond, reflect. Moving our understanding towards more complex and more abstract ideas, building upon what we already know. And this is what we'll call progression. Okay. Moving towards more abstract concepts. But that's difficult to teach about, isn't it? Abstract concepts. Something like, when I mentioned DBAE earlier, the 4 components, of those 4 components, aesthetics is probably the most difficult to understand because it's the philosophy of art. Okay. So how can we do that? Here's one. I'll leave it on there for 10 seconds. Lights going on and off. This won the Turner Prize in 2000. Okay. And that's all it is. It's not the floor, it's not the wall, it's not that door. So something like this, if you like, challenges our expectations as to what art is or what it can be. Okay. I could talk about this, but actually showing you this and getting you to reflect, sit back and think, is that art? Didn't think art could be like that. Is it art or not art? Okay, maybe it's art because it's in an art gallery. Okay, if it's art, is it good art or is it poor art? You know, so all of these questions, they're quite simple questions, but they lead to more abstract and higher level understanding about the philosophy of art, if you like. That's still going on and off. I quite like it. I mean, yes, I wish I'd have thought about it, but I didn't. This is the case. This is what artists will always say. Yes, you could have done that, but you didn't. I did it. You know, in this case, Martin Creed did it. Lights going on and off. And of course, there's a long history to this sort of work. If I was going to teach you about this, I would use the strategy called envoying. I would get a group to discuss the merits of this. I'd probably get one group to discuss how good it was, another group to discuss how bad it was. You know, just to put it in very simple, simplistic terms, and then come together and have an argument about it. So that's a way that we could teach about aesthetics. Okay, discussion in small groups. And we'll do some of this when I do the workshop afterwards. This envoy approach is actually a very useful way of getting people to talk and think about artworks, or anything else for that matter. In my view, this particular artwork, and I will call it an artwork, is the most significant art of the 20th century. I don't think it's particularly good, whatever that means, and there's no craft involved, because sometimes we get involved with the craft aspect of it, that, you know, yes, we're not meant to look at this aesthetically necessarily. Marcel Duchamp, when he created this, or at least when he replaced it into an art gallery or an art situation from a plumbing shop, was poking his nose at the art world. He wasn't saying, oh, look at the sublime aesthetic qualities of this, like some people think. Oh, he's making us look again at it and appreciate its aesthetics. No, he was simply saying, I don't care what you think. Art is nonsense anyway. And he gave up art in the midst of his success, because he was a very successful painter as well, just to play chess. So if you'll forgive the phrase, he was taking the piss out of the art world with this. That's all he was doing. It's anti-art, you know. It's not an issue. But these are things that we can discuss. These are things that will lead to a greater understanding about the nature of art by getting our students to discuss these things. So, yes, there are lots of different ways in which we can, and strategies we can use to talk about and learn about paintings and sculptures and stuff. But where does pedagogy come into teaching people how to do things about procedural art? Well, that's a little bit more straightforward in some ways. So procedural knowledge is all of these things, starting from maybe a 3-year-old, you know. How to hold a pencil, gluing, sticking, cutting, and then progressing, getting more and more adept at the psychomotor coordination. This is a thing I thought of some years ago. I included it in one of my books, the notion of the persevering frog. Frog wants to get to a juicy fly that's at the top of some stairs. The stairs, each step is 10 centimeters, but the frog can only jump 9. So he never gets above the first step. Okay. So he perseveres to step jumping lessons, you know, gets better at it. Then he can jump 10 centimeters. So once he can jump 10 centimeters, go to the whole top. Okay, go. Right. I think I've got a picture here. Here we go. Oh, yeah, it's animated. Look at that. All right. So now he can go there. But what if he doesn't feel like doing all that exercise? Or he can't. Maybe he's disabled frog. All right. Then you need to start thinking creatively. We tend to think that if you try hard enough, you'll get what you want. But we know that that actually isn't the case. I can't run a marathon, no matter how hard I try. You know, if I did practice, 10 hours a day for the next year, I still wouldn't do a marathon. You know. So it might be that he decides, I say he, could be a she, that the frog doesn't want to do this exercise. He might think about, is there any other way I can get that fly? Do I even want the fly? you know. So he's starting to think laterally, if you like. But the easiest thing is he just uses his tongue. And have you seen a frog's tongue? They just go, yeah, okay. Many creative solutions to his fly catching problem. He doesn't have to do, you know, the perseverance, the doing the 10 centimetre jump. Although, yeah, that's always an option for those who are athletically inclined. You know, that's an analogy, by the way. So, I want to talk briefly about the sort of environments that we need in order to facilitate meaningful learning. By meaningful, I mean something that's, for one thing, creative, and something that promotes wisdom, if you like. Workshops, studios, and laboratories. This is where real learning takes place, in my view. Not so much in lecture halls, I'm afraid, or classrooms where pupils are just sat static most of the day. We want active learning, I'm suggesting. I mentioned about using outside resources, and this is something that was flagged up in that report from the Open University I mentioned a few moments ago. Real world experiences. Because real wisdom will not come from acquiring school knowledge, it will come from having real experiences in the so-called real world. So learning will emerge from a creative environment. This is a picture I took in a Cambridge art room. I just thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, you've got all this stuff around. So this is against the objectives model of learning, if you like. That learning emerges from a particular situation. And I would tend to go along with that. The objectives model has its good points. You know, if you want to learn how to strip and clean a rifle and put it back together again in 2 minutes, yes, objectives is a good way. And that's where the objectives model of learning came from, was the American military mainly, you know. But we're not all going to be shooting people. This is from 1988 here with my students working in the jungle. I thought I'd show that picture because it's, you know, this is going outside of the studio. Okay, these are some students in Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. Thought I'd show a few more things. This is when I was teacher training in Reading. This is my father's boat, not my boat actually. Took them out sketching on the River Thames. I said, okay, I'm going to take a picture now. Now, we're not out here just to have fun. You've got to show that you're working. I want you to hold up your pencils. So he's holding up his spoon, of course. And, yeah. Anyway, so just some examples of going outside of the classroom. And this is in Cambridge, doing some raku firing. You know, this is actually, it's not saying this is how you do raku firing, you know, follow my example. It's actually going out there and doing it. You know, these are important things. So, I want you to think about human development and artistic development in terms of the environment. What is the most appropriate learning environment in which to learn in a meaningful way? Maturation. Do we learn more simply through getting older? Yes, to some extent. Facilitation. To what extent does the teacher facilitate, you know, make an appropriate environment, or actually coach, actually hold the hand and say, this is how you do it, follow my example. There's room for all of these things. So when we're talking about artistic development, all of these things will come into play. Not just the environment, but the gradual process of natural maturation, becoming older, being able to facilitate learning by making sure there's the appropriate resources available, and also intervening whenever necessary with coaching and showing things how they should be done. So I've come up with this developmental model for art learning. Now I've used a couple of researchers. This is Ralph Smith, Stages of Aesthetic Learning. I won't go through all of this. Have we got time? No. Parsons says, Michael Parsons, How We Understand Art. And I come up with these possible practical focus here. So starting off with learning threshold skills, this is basic skills such as gluing, sewing, cutting, painting, drawing, so forth. And moving forward, exploration of expressive use of media. A lot of adolescents are concerned with identity, and this carries on to adulthood. Refining skills in light of others' work, development of a personal style. And most people will not reach these stages unless they've been to art college. Maybe not even then. But these are different stages of aesthetic learning. I'll move quickly through these. So, I'm saying the future's now. Humans learn in the way, nowadays, the way that we've always learnt, from 50,000 years ago. Language, and I've been using a lot of language, and I've been looking at the etymology of words and so forth. This facilitates learning. Scaffolding is critical. And as I've indicated, this could be, scaffold is not necessarily by a human. Could be, via a drone, via AI, or whatever. So when we talk about future pedagogies, the psychological learning is the same, but the mode of delivery could be quite different. Declarative knowledge, that's knowing about art, can be facilitated through this react, research, respond, reflect model. Procedural knowledge, that involves thinking through and within a material in an appropriate learning environment. And I come up with this term, I like this term because it has a nice rounded feel to it, practical sagacity. This is to do with becoming wise through doing, if you like. Because my initial understanding about the nature of education is to promote wisdom, to bring that out of a learner. So in reverse, it refers to wise teachers through their practice and through their practical engagement with various materials and media, using their own wisdom to facilitate wisdom amongst their learners. That's a quote that I self-plagiarized. It's from my Art and Craft of Pedagogy book. I thought, oh, did I write that? That sounds good. I'll include that. Okay, so that's that. A bit more in the red zone. This is definitely red zone. I've talked about wisdom. Who's the archetypal wisdom person? Solomon. Yeah? The wisdom of Solomon in the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament, Christian Bible as well for that matter. This is Hebrew. It's from Ecclesiastes, which I occasionally suggest to my PhD students to read. It means there is nothing new under the sun in Hebrew. So you need it all. Okay, that's it. Any questions? Good. I thought I'd plug these. We know this one already. This is out this year. These are new. There's nothing new under the sun except a couple of books. Okay. Got this one. This one hasn't come out yet, but it's about to come out next month. Okay. So I'm going to plug those two, because we want to be up to date, don't we? Yeah. And I've got the list of references that I've used there, just in case you need those. Okay.
Richard, can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone else doesn't have any. Are you suggesting that perhaps future pedagogies are perhaps a fallacy then, if it's the kind of core fundamentals of education?
Yeah. I'm saying we probably don't know, and it's one thing that will remain the same is the way that humans learn, is what I'm saying, because it hasn't changed much in the last 50,000 years. That's what I'm saying. I mean, yes, we can argue about that. Yeah. I mean, there are different ways of learning and acquiring wisdom. But psychologically, I think the way that we acquire concepts is fairly constant. And
what advice then would you give to, I guess, new art teachers? A lot of people
don't do it.
What advice would you give to them? Because they're going to be reading about, obviously in education, there's new pedagogies coming out all of the time that people are sort of
Well,
changing concepts and reinventing. So how do you
keep
do
your head down and do as you're told, I think, is probably the best advice in practical terms. But I think without being too flippant about it, I would say that, keep reading, keep going to in-service training, see what the new pedagogies actually are, and be a critical consumer of that. Don't just take things because they're given to you. Be a critically aware consumer. And in the same way that I've asked you initially to be critical consumers of what I'm doing and what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, to identify what are takeaway things, what's the takeaway thing in terms of me modeling being a lecturer, for example, oh, I wouldn't do it like that. I wouldn't show that picture, and so forth. So you need to be critical consumers, is what I'd say. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Has anyone else got any questions? Do you not need to have a question?
I'm just soaking it all in, not being critical at this point.
Yeah.
Paul? I'm doing what Richard said. I'll pick on people in the audience.
No, I don't. I mean, they'll take too long.
Didn't understand a word he said.
Okay, well, thank you very much
okay.
for coming back. It is the end of the session, and thank you for coming to this lunchtime seminar. The recording for this will go live on our CARE website, so you will be able to access it there, and if you want to kind of revisit anything. And I'm sure Richard's probably open to emails as well.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay.
thank you
Thank you.
for coming to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard's flown halfway across the world, so that's...
Yeah, my brain is still a bit mushy, so it's good not to have too many questions. Okay.
And those of you that are in my pedagogy class, at 3 o'clock, we'll meet in the design studio for the rest of the workshop. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.